Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Boss Economics World, the only show where we take the dismal science of economics, sprinkle it with a healthy dose of satire, and serve it up hotter than a Wall Street trader's temper during a market crash. I'm your host, the one, the only, boss economist extraordinaire, here to break down the economic chaos of the world with wit, wisdom, and a little bit of what the heck is going on here. Flair. Today, we're diving headfirst into the tariff-tastic, trade war-tacular mess that is Donald Trump's 2025 protectionist playbook. Buckle up, folks, this is gonna be a wild ride. Now, if you've been paying attention to the news, or, let's be honest, just scrolling X while pretending to work, you've probably heard about Trump's latest tariff tantrum. As of July 28, 2025, the man who brought us Make America Great Again is now bringing us Make Tariffs Great Again. And oh boy, is it causing a global economic ruckus. From Japanese carmakers to American tomato growers, and even Vietnamese sneaker factories, the fallout from Trump's America First doctrine is hitting harder than a double espresso shot on a Monday morning. But don't worry, folks, because here at Boss Economics World, we're not just gonna tell you what's happening, we're gonna peel back the layers of this economic onion, make you cry a little, and then laugh at the absurdity of it all. So, let's get started. First things first, let's talk about the star of today's show, tariffs. For those of you who slept through Econ 101, or, let's be real, never took it, tariffs are basically taxes on imported goods. Think of them as the government's way of saying, hey, foreign stuff, you're not welcome here unless you pay the VIP entry fee. And Trump, my friends, is the bouncer at Club America, and he's jacked up the cover charge to levels we haven't seen since the 1930s. According to Bloomberg Economics, the average U.S. tariff rate is now sitting at a juicy 13.5%, up from a measly 2.5% last year. And if the EU deal goes through, that number could climb to 16%. 16%, folks. That's higher than the interest rate on your cousin's shady cryptocurrency loan. Now, Trump's been waving the tariff flag like it's the 4th of July, promising to slap even higher duties on countries that don't play ball by August 1, 2025. He's already cut preliminary deals with the EU, Japan, and a few others, but for everyone else, it's a game of economic Russian roulette. And let's not forget his social media victory laps. Back in June 2025, he posted, and I quote, "Because of tariffs, our economy is booming." All caps, of course, because subtlety is not his brand. But here's the kicker, folks, while Trump's busy popping champagne over record-high stock markets and a Treasury revenue windfall, he conveniently forgets to mention who's actually paying those tariffs. Spoiler alert, it's not China, it's not the EU, it's not Japan, it's American importers, businesses, and, you guessed it, you, the consumer. Alright, let's zoom in from the surface-level tariff talk and get to the juicy economic meat of this story. Because, folks, this isn't just about numbers on a trade agreement, it's about real-world pain. Companies are freezing capital spending, rerouting supply chains, and trimming margins faster than a barber giving a buzz cut. And the data backs this up. According to the United Nations 2025 World Investment Report, global foreign direct investment, those big, long-term bets on factories and projects that drive growth, is set to drop by another 11% this year, on top of an 11% decline in 2024. Why? Because Trump's trade war has turned the global economy into a giant game of whack-a-mole, and businesses are too scared to invest when they don't know where the next tariff hammer is gonna fall. Take Nature Sweet Tomatoes, for example. These guys are the largest greenhouse tomato producer in North America, supplying your favorite supermarket chains. They had big plans to expand their Arizona operations, think doubling their capacity, creating jobs, the whole American dream shebang. But then, bam! Trump's tariffs hit them from all angles. Their Mexican tomato production got slapped with duties, their inputs, like coconut husks from Sri Lanka and fertilizer from Chile, got taxed, and even their plans to import greenhouse systems from the Netherlands and Israel are now in jeopardy. NatureSweet CEO, Rodolfo Spielman, summed it up perfectly, "My main competitors in Canada are getting no tariffs." So the current situation is the worst possible situation for us. Ouch, folks. That's not just a business problem, that's an economic gut punch. And it's not just tomatoes feeling the heat. Big-name U.S. companies like General Motors, Dow Incorporated, and Tesla are seeing their earnings take a hit. Japanese carmakers, who rely on the U.S. as their biggest market, are slashing export prices just to stay afloat. Mitsubishi Motors CFO, Kentaro Matsuoka, admitted that even the lower 15% tariff deal with Japan is still squeezing their sales. And over in Europe, Volkswagen, Europe's largest carmaker, cut its 2025 earnings guidance because Trump's tariffs are adding billions of euros in costs. Folks, this is what happens when you use tariffs like a blunt sledgehammer instead of a surgical scalpel. Sure, you might hit your target, but you're also smashing everything else in the room. Now, let's talk about the consumer, the real engine of the U.S. economy. According to ING's chief international economist, James Knightley, consumer spending in 2025 has flatlined after strong post-pandemic gains. Why? Because households are worried about tariff-induced price hikes and a cooling job market. And the data supports this. U.S. GDP growth is expected to slow, with the Atlanta Fed's GDP Now model predicting a measly 1% growth in inflation-adjusted final sales to domestic purchasers for Q2 2025, down from 2.9% in Q4 2024. Translation, folks, the economy is stalling, and tariffs are pouring sand into the gears. Alright, folks, now it's time to put on our economist hats, or, in my case, my boss economist extraordinaire cape, and dig into the deeper economic issues at play here. Because this tariff tantrum isn't just about higher prices or corporate earnings, it's about the fundamental reshaping of the global economy. Let's start with supply chains. For decades, companies have built intricate, efficient networks that span the globe, sourcing materials from one country, assembling products in another, and selling them in a third. But Trump's tariffs are throwing a wrench into that machine, forcing businesses to reroute, relocate, and rethink everything. Bloomberg Economics estimates that the hit to the world economy from this trade war will reach $2 trillion by the end of 2027. $2 trillion, folks. That's enough to buy every single person on Earth a fancy coffee, twice. But here's the kicker, while some of those losses might be recouped as supply chains realign, the process is slow, costly, and chaotic. Take Vietnam, for example. During Trump's first-term trade war with China, Vietnam was a big winner, attracting manufacturers looking for an alternative to China. But now, Trump's turned his tariff gun on Vietnam, announcing a 46% tariff in April 2025, only to cut it to 20% in June. Oh, but with a catch, products routed through Vietnam from China could face double that rate. Vietnamese manufacturers are stuck in limbo, unsure whether to ramp up production, order more materials, or lay off workers. And this uncertainty isn't just a Vietnam problem, it's a global problem. From Brazil to India to France, businesses are delaying investments, rethinking strategies, and bracing for the next tariff twist. And let's not forget the elephant in the room, economic inequality. Tariffs might sound like a great way to bring jobs back to the US, but the reality is far messier. Sure, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is touting a so-called capex comeback, a surge in domestic equipment production driven by Trump's tax bill. But the data tells a different story. Investment slowed markedly after April 2025, with non-residential investment contributing just 0.1% to GDP growth in Q2, according to the Atlanta Federal. Meanwhile, the benefits of these policies are skewed toward big corporations and wealthy investors, while everyday consumers and small businesses, like NatureSweet tomatoes, bear the brunt of higher costs and uncertainty. It's classic trickle-down economics, folks, but with a protectionist twist. And spoiler alert, the trickle is more like a drip. Now, folks, let's take a step back and appreciate the sheer absurdity of this economic circus. Picture this, Trump, the ringmaster, standing in the center of the global trade arena, cracking his tariff whip while shouting, "America first." Meanwhile, Japanese carmakers are doing backflips to cut prices, American tomato growers are juggling higher costs, and Vietnamese sneaker factories are walking a tightrope of uncertainty. And in the audience? That's you, the consumer, paying higher prices for everything from cars to ketchup, all while Trump takes a bow and declares, "Mission accomplished." But here's the real punchline, folks, Trump's tariffs are like a bad reality TV show, lots of drama, big promises, and very little substance. He points to record-high stock markets as proof of his genius, but let's be real, those gains are fueled by corporate stock buybacks and investor optimism that Trump won't actually follow through on his wildest threats. And that Treasury revenue windfall he loves to brag about? It's not a sign of economic strength, it's a sign that American businesses and consumers are footing the bill. It's like bragging about how much money you made selling your own furniture. Sure, you've got cash now, but good luck sitting down later. Alright, folks, it's time for the Boss Economics World Hot Take, because if we're not stirring the pot, are we even doing economics right? So, what's next for the global economy in this tariff-tastic world? Well, if the data is any guide, we're in for a bumpy ride. The IMF's latest World Economic Outlook, released in July 2025, slashed its global growth forecast to 3.1% for 2026, down from 3.5% pre-trade war, citing escalating trade tensions as the primary culprit. And the World Bank's 2025 Global Economic Prospects Report warns that prolonged trade uncertainty could push an additional 30 million people into poverty by 2030, as emerging markets bear the brunt of slower global demand and investment. But here's the silver lining, or, let's be honest, the slightly less tarnished cloud: some countries are trying to capitalize on the chaos. India, for example, is positioning itself as the next big manufacturing hub, touting low wages, a young workforce, and juicy incentives. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal is optimistic about securing a lower tariff rate than the 26% currently on the table, and companies like Delta Electronics India are seeing a flood of inquiries from businesses looking to diversify away from China and Vietnam. But let's not kid ourselves, folks, rebuilding global supply chains isn't like flipping a switch. It takes years, billions of dollars, and a whole lot of patience, none of which are in abundant supply in Trump's America. And what about China, the big bad wolf of Trump's trade war? Well, the Chinese economy is feeling the heat, but it's not down for the count. Growth slowed to 5.2% in Q2 2025, and exports to the US are taking a hit, but China's pivoting hard, flooding other markets with cheap goods. Emerging markets like Brazil and India might see lower prices, but at the cost of their own domestic producers getting squeezed. It's a classic case of, be careful what you wish for, folks. Trump wanted to hurt China, but he might just end up hurting everyone else instead. So, folks, what's the moral of this tariff-tastic tale? It's simple. Protectionism is a blunt weapon, and right now, it's doing more harm than good. From corporate earnings to consumer wallets, from global supply chains to economic inequality, Trump's trade war is leaving a trail of economic wreckage in its wake. And the worst part? It's all so predictable. Economists like Stanford's Nicholas Bloom have been warning for years that uncertainty kills investment, and Trump's tariff circus is uncertainty on steroids. But here's the good news, folks, we don't have to just sit back and watch the show. For you ordinary viewers out there, concerned about your financial future, start paying attention to how these policies hit your wallet, because those higher prices at the grocery store and car dealership aren't going away anytime soon. And for you finance pros in the audience, it's time to get creative, help your clients navigate this mess, whether it's diversifying supply chains, hedging against currency risks, or finding new markets to exploit. Because if there's one thing boss economics world knows, it's that chaos breeds opportunity, for those smart enough to seize it. And as for you, Mr. Trump, well, let's just say, maybe it's time to trade in the tariff whip for a little economic humility. Because at the end of the day, folks, the global economy isn't a reality TV set, it's a complex, interconnected system, and you can't just yell, "You're fired" at the rest of the world without consequences. That's all for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in to Boss Economics World, where we make sense of the economic madness so you don't have to. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell, because in this crazy world, you'll need all the economic satire you can get. Until next time, stay savvy, stay skeptical, and stay boss.